Let's talk some NFL. Good morning. Welcome in. We are the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 1059 The Zone. I'm your host, Bo Bounds, and I want to tell you about the Jackson Food and Wine Festival, March 2nd. March 2nd, the Jackson Food and Wine Festival down at the Mississippi Museum of Art with culinary rock stars from around the country, including Kat Cora from Kat Cora's Kitchen in Los Angeles, Boudalo from Marky's Caviar in New York, and Ashley Shanti, Good Hot Fish, Asheville, North Carolina, among local chefs too. Jackson Food and Wine Festival, March 2nd. They've got the general admission and the VIP. Go ahead and secure your culinary pass at jacksonfoodandwine.com. That's JXN, jacksonfoodandwine.com. March 2nd at the Mississippi Museum of Art. We want to welcome in NFL Insider, Mike Florio, NBC Sports, Pro Football Talk, and he joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. So, Mike Florio, you grew up a Minnesota Vikings fan.
Yes, unfortunately, but I will say this. Whenever my son gives me a hard time for infecting him with the same virus, I tell him that I never would have ended up in this business if I had been a fan of the Steelers in the 70s, because I would have enjoyed multiple Super Bowl titles and I wouldn't have followed football the way that I did through the 80s and 90s as I was waiting for the Vikings to finally get back to the Super Bowl and lose a fifth one, which they still haven't done. And that's what ultimately got me into this business. So that's the only silver lining in the dark cloud I've parked over my entire family, by making my son the same kind of tormented football fan that I've been pretty much all my life.
I think it worked out. Mike Florio sold ProFootballTalk.com to NBC Sports, and he's
correction. Great misconception. I own 100% of the equity of ProFootballTalk.com and its parent company, Football Talk LLC. I license my content to NBC. I still own the entire operation and have since day one.
Okay,
just want to be clear.
Even better. But either way, how about this? The career has worked out for sure. All right, when I was growing, I turned 50 in November, and growing up, one of my favorite players was Ahmad Rashad. So I know he was one of yours too at some point.
Bobby Moore. I remember when he was Bobby Moore. That's how old I am.
Wow. Okay.
Played for the Bills. Bobby Moore. Ended up Ahmad Rashad with the Vikings.
Mm-hmm. I actually felt sorry, the whole Bud Grant thing. It was he was Marv Levy before we had so much focus in media. Obviously, it's even more so fast forward 20, 30 years, but he was kind of Marv Levy before Marv Levy. You agree?
Well, he's Kyle Shanahan before Kyle Shanahan, too, potentially.
That's true.
Somebody asked me that last week, what's Shanahan's current legacy? He's in danger of becoming Bud Grant in this day and age, and the problem is the next time the 49ers get to a Super Bowl, there's going to be even more pressure and focus on whether or not Shanahan can win the big one, especially if they end up going against the Chiefs again. So, yeah, Bud Grant, the original guy who had to be. Look, you can't have greatness on a sustained basis without somebody who consistently ends up coming in second. You can't. And it happened in basketball with Michael Jordan. It's happening now with Patrick Mahomes. It happened with Tom Brady. And it happened back in the 70s with all the great teams we saw. And it was the Dolphins, and it was the Steelers, and it was the Raiders, each of those three teams on their way to greatness, getting past Bud Grant. So, yeah. And I guess the difference is Bud Grant had a variety pack, of teams that vanquished him. For Shanahan so far, it's been this inability to get past the Chiefs.
Who's the greatest Viking ever? Is it Fran Tarkenton or someone else?
Probably Fran Tarkenton, although my original favorite football player, when I really got into it in 1973, I discovered it December 23 of 1972 when the Immaculate Reception happened. But because I grew up near Pittsburgh and everybody in town was a Steelers fan and I had to be different, I wanted to find my own team, and I locked on to the Vikings. And in 73, Chuck Foreman was a rookie, and that was my original guy I wanted to be, because I knew I couldn't throw it, but I could put my head down and run it, although I didn't run it very well either. but I wanted to be Chuck Foreman, and Chuck Foreman was the first one that I really locked onto. But, yeah, Fran Tarkenton, the only franchise quarterback the Vikings have ever had, even though they traded him and brought him back. And I think, they still are trying to find that guy that will be the 10 to 15-year answer at the position.
Right. Okay. So are you thumbs up or thumbs down on Kirk Cousins?
Well, I feel like Kirk Cousins has gotten to a point where in his collaboration with Kevin O'Connell, it makes sense to find a way to keep him around. The Vikings are being coy about it because they don't want to overpay. And they may find out the hard way that by waiting to see what others will offer Kirk Cousins will get offered something that when the Vikings try to scramble to match it, Cousins might just say, you had your chance, I'm moving on. That's the risk they're taking. And I think they're smart enough to understand that. Reportedly they're not willing to give him another fully guaranteed contract. He had a 3-year fully guaranteed deal when he started with the Vikings in 2018. He's had a couple of extensions since then that would give him multiple years of fully guaranteed money. They're not willing to do it now. Are the Falcons willing to do it? Are the Commanders willing to do it? Is another team willing to do it? And how much of that collusion that we saw last year, even though everyone denies it because that's what they do, but, when Lamar Jackson was available, nobody made a big move to go get him. We're still 2 years removed from Jimmy Haslam getting the cold shoulder from all of his oligarch buddies at the league meetings for giving the 5-year fully guaranteed contract to Deshaun Watson. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not there's a team out there that will break the bank for Kirk Cousins, that will offer him $45, $50 million a year, 35 coming off of a torn Achilles tendon. The Vikings may be thinking, we'll just sit back and wait for what other teams won't do, and then we'll keep him for a year or two. At some point, though, I think they want to get themselves in position to get somebody who will be that 10 to 15-year player. The only guy they've had since Fran Tarkenton who had a chance was Dante Culpepper. He tore all of his knee ligaments in October of 2005 after he'd had a spectacular 2004 season. That's it. That's the closest they've come. And I think once they finally move on from Cousins or Cousins moves on from them, priority number one should be getting somebody who they can start young and keep as deep into his career as possible.
Okay. Mike Florio, NFL Insider, ProFootballTalk.com. Also NBC Sports with Chris Sims, which I think they do a good job together. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. All right, I got to go to I'm considered a Dak Prescott apologist. And I was not a Cowboys fan until Dak went there because I'm a Mississippi State alum. And so let's walk through some of this. Let's start with Mike Zimmer because, well, you know about everybody, but he's tied to the Vikings. And they have hired him as a defensive coordinator. Is that a good hire, solid hire? Where does it stand with Mike Florio?
Well, I mean, look, Mike Zimmer was effective enough as a defensive coordinator that he eventually became a head coach. Now, he's got a old school personality. It'll be interesting to see how it meshes with guys like Michael Parsons. It'll be interesting to see what Zimmer does to try to get that team to maximize its ability. It might work in the short term. It will wear on guys over the long haul. They were happy in Minnesota when he finally was fired because they just had enough of his uniquely rough and tumble, in your face, tell it like it is personality. And I've experienced that from him. Hell, he thought I got him fired in Minnesota, and I said to him, hey, Mike, I wish I had that kind of power. If I did, I wouldn't be using it on getting you fired. That's for damn sure. So, we'll see how it goes. But he's clearly proven he can get the job done. The question is, how much will they need different players to do whatever he wants to do? One of the things I learned from him years ago at the scouting combine, his dad was a high school coach, and you take the players you have and you come up with your systems accordingly. So I don't think he's going to try to jam square pegs into round holes, and he's going to work with the players he has or whoever they deliver. But I just think it's going to be an interesting experiment. It's going to be a culture change. It's going to be a personality difference, and it might be a wake-up call for Michael Parsons, who seems to have a lot of power and influence with Jerry Jones. I wonder what Mike Zimmer is going to say to Michael Parsons and do with Michael Parsons. Will he give him free rein? Will he coach him hard? Will he be demanding? Will he be rough and tumble? That's all to be determined.
Yeah, okay. I like where you're going here. Mike Florio on the Out of Bounds show. Micah Parsons is an insane talent. We all recognize that. And many a times he's really, really good. But you may be hitting on something that Dan Quinn, there wasn't quite enough maybe discipline in the way he played. And he could do and freelance however he wanted. Do you agree with that, Mike?
Well, yeah, and it's beyond that. Look, he's got this podcast he does, and he speaks his mind after they lost to the Packers, and he went radio silent for 2 weeks. He talked about how he's not the one who puts himself in position during games. It's the coaching staff that does, kind of throwing a grenade at the coaching staff. And Emmitt Smith was on with us at the Super Bowl, and he went off about the current state of the Cowboys and how the players aren't committed collectively to winning like his generation of Cowboys was. And it's easy to look at it and say this is just, old man yelling at clouds, and it was always better when we did it, and these kids don't know what they're doing. But, there has been a sense that the Cowboys underachieve, and they have a great regular season, and they get to the playoffs, and they don't get it done. So is it the players? Is it the coaching? Does Mike McCarthy not do enough?
Or is it the front office and the lack of a real GM?
Well, right. But, they have a pretty good team. I think the issue is Mike McCarthy and the coaching staff, after you got 17 games in the books for a regular season, they don't do enough to crack their own code and spot their own tendencies and coach their way to victory in the postseason when everyone knows what they do and how they do it. They think they can continue to get by on what we do and how we do it. You need to have some wrinkles. You need to get ahead of the curve. You need to work even harder in that week of your playoff game than you did in any of the weeks of the regular season. And I just don't think they do that, which is the explanation, as I see it, for why they can't get very far in the postseason.
Okay, so it's a combination of McCarthy, but it sounds like, Mike Florio, it's a little bit of culture too, right?
Yeah, I think that culture is part of it. And I think that coaching is part of it, and that's why I'm surprised, as many were, that they decided to keep Mike McCarthy after losing in embarrassing fashion in the wild card round of the playoffs at home after they had won 16 straight home playoff games. Not 16 straight home playoff games, but 16 straight home games.
Right. You keep up with it more than we do. Why did Dan Quinn go from running man to running zone and allowing Jordan Love and LaFleur and the Packers to have guys running wide open and I don't know what looked like some kind of soft zone, Mike?
Yeah, I don't know why he did it, but I know what the outcome was. And there's a certain point where when it's starting to go sideways, you better change something. You better be ready to do something else. And, we've seen this time and again where there are certain players who get underestimated and you find out the hard way that you thought a guy couldn't do something and he did it. And by the time you realized you needed to change, it was too late.
Okay. Ed Warder said that Micah Parsons ran out of gas at the end of the year. Agree or disagree?
I don't know because, is it an issue of coaching? Is it an issue of he ran? I don't know. I have no opinion. All I know is the team ran out of gas, and he's one of the best players on the team. And at some point, he's responsible for his performance. But when you don't have, and he's already said openly he wants to have a Chris Jones type of a defensive tackle there, if you don't have other guys who can attract attention and create havoc, it's too much for one guy to do it.
Okay. Mike Florio, ProFootballTalk.com, and on NBC Sports. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. All right, I got to go to – this may surprise you. And we're going to talk about your book in a minute, but Gardner Minshew is from here. And he's a hell of a competitor. His story is amazing. Every time he gets a shot, he plays pretty damn well. He's obviously never going to be a star in the league, but he can ball. Who do you think he could sign with, and what may be the best fit for Gardner Minshew?
Well, there are slated to be a lot of free agent quarterbacks 3 weeks from tomorrow. It's coming, and it's amazing. And you look at the list of names, and this is just some of them. Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill, Baker Mayfield, Joe Flacco, who was the comeback player of the year. He's available to anyone who wants to sign him. Jacoby Brissett's available. Mitch Trubisky's available. Tyrod Taylor's available. Marcus Mariota, Sam Darnold, Drew Lock. And so I think Minshew did enough last year with the Colts that someone should look at him seriously as a guy that they could bring in and let him compete to be the starter. My concern is he's going to be like a placeholder, and we've seen this pretty much every year where there's a veteran quarterback who gets signed in the middle of March. They hold up the jersey. Everyone's excited. And then with that team's first pick in the ensuing draft, they select his eventual replacement, which is exactly what happened to Minshew last year in Indianapolis. He signs with the team, and then they draft Anthony Richardson, and he's no longer the starter until Richardson's injured. So, that's going to be the real question. With so many veteran options out there available, if you're a team looking for a starter, you're going to have others, I think, ahead of Minshew. And what happens is when that legal tampering period opens on the Monday before official free agency, teams will start calling agents, and they'll make an offer to a player through the agent, and they need to know right now what you're going to do. I need to know in 5 minutes what you're going to do because I'm going to move on to the next guy. So as teams have their list of quarterbacks that they're prioritizing in free agency, how far down that list is Minshew going to be? I don't know. But there's going to be others that I think get the call first. But Minshew's going to hear from somebody early, and he's going to get a chance somewhere. And, if he doesn't get a chance that he likes, then why not just come back to the Colts and be the backup, assuming that the way Anthony Richardson plays, there's a chance you're going to get back on the field maybe sooner than later.
Good point. Mike Florio on the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. All right, Stone Cold Chris Jones is from here too. What do you think the Chiefs do?
Well, the first question is whether or not they use the franchise tag. And they've set the stage to use the franchise tag by picking up his option, even though the option doesn't officially extend the deal. It preserves their ability to use a tag that would be about $32 million, a little bit more than that, to keep him in place for at least 1 year. He was franchise tagged in 2020, so that means they couldn't tag him again in 25. This would be one more year with maybe the opportunity to turn that into a long-term deal. I wrote about this yesterday at PFT. I won't bore you with the details, but it gets very complicated to try to turn the franchise tag into a long-term deal when, as a practical matter, they can't tag him next year because it would be too expensive. So what are they going to do? The options are sign him to a long-term deal before you tag him and then sign him to a long-term deal, tag him and trade him, or just let him hit the market and try to sign him in competition with other teams. I think if they do that, they're going to lose him because I think we're getting to the point with the Chiefs, kind of like where we were with the Cowboys of the 90s, where free agency set in, and it really first hit when the Cowboys had that juggernaut team. Other teams were willing to overpay players to just get them off the Cowboys. And I could see somebody, and I don't know that this will happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody like Jim Harbaugh says to the Chargers, we got to overpay Chris Jones because, number one, we need him, and number two, we need to get him the hell off the Chiefs. So if they let him get to the open market, somebody's going to make him an offer that they just won't be willing to match. I think tag and trade is a potentially intriguing outcome if they're able to carry a $32 million cap charge until they can get a trade done.
Okay. All right, one more before we talk about the book. A.J. Brown is from here too, and he is a phenomenal player, and I love him. Are you concerned at all about his temper and what happened with the Eagles the last part of the year, Mike?
I'm not concerned about him specifically. I'm concerned about the Eagles generally, and I think that, somewhere, somehow, there will be a report about exactly what happened with the Eagles last year that caused them to fall apart the way they did, and why ownership decided at the end of the year to stay the course. I don't know what Nick Sirianni said to Jeffrey Lurie to get him to not make a coaching change, but they just completely fell apart down the stretch. And is it as simple as when they lost at home 42-19 to the 49ers that they just realized this isn't our year? It's not like last year. We can't hold this together, and they just completely fell apart? I don't know. But they completely fell apart, and there was frustration on the part of A.J. Brown, and he and Jalen Hurts are tight, and that was one of the reasons that A.J. Brown was traded there in the first place. And I think Hurts had that knee injury that affected him a lot more than anyone realizes all year long. But they're going to have to come up with some solutions. They have two new coordinators, a lot of pressure this year on the Eagles and on the offense. All I know is this. There was a stretch where A.J. Brown had, 6+ games of 125 yards or more receiving, which was a record. And then he just disappeared after that. So I don't know, but I think it's more than A.J. Brown. And I think one of these days we're going to find out what really caused everything to go haywire for the Eagles, and it's going to be a hell of a story when we know.
Agree. Mike Florio, NFL insider on the show. All right, Mike, you've got a book out, Father of Mine. It's on Amazon. Tell us about it.
Well, I grew up 60 miles from Pittsburgh in the 70s, and my dad was a bookie who was connected to the local crew there. So I picked up some things just in my formative years with my eyes and ears open. And I was always fascinated by, and I assume this is true in every small town at the time, the mob pretty much operated out in the open, and nobody seemed to give them a hard time. And, there were lines that if they didn't cross them, they would be allowed to do whatever they were doing. And it was just it was a strange thing because it was the only normal that I knew. But as I got older and reflected on it and thought about it, and one of the things that I've learned over the last 23 years of writing about the NFL every day is, number one, I can write a lot. Number two, I can write fast. And number three, what I write about the NFL is relevant for maybe 24 hours. So during the pandemic, when I had a little more time to do some different things, I had an idea and I sat down and started typing. And the next thing you know, I had a manuscript and I thought about it. I rewrote it. I thought about it. I rewrote it. And we put it out middle of last year and dropped the price to $3.99 for the ebook recently. I just want to give people I didn't realize how dumb of a price point $3.99, even $4.99 is. Most ebooks are a lot more expensive than that, even though you don't get anything other than an electronic file. But I just want people to read it and enjoy it. And it's been a nice balance. Writing has been a nice balance to what I do every day, because what I do every day, like I said, has a very short shelf life.
Right.
And I have written literally millions of words over the years that are forgotten after 24 hours. So I figure if I write enough novels, one of them won't stink. It'll probably be the one I least expect. And maybe when I'm dead and gone, people will be reading it and enjoying it. And that's I don't need to have my name on a building somewhere. I just like to have a book that maybe somebody finds in 50 years and says, hey, you know what, that wasn't very bad.
That's great, man. Mike Florio's book, Father of Mine, on Amazon, only $3.99 ebook, and ties in local bookies and the mob and all that. That's great.
It's also set in 1973. I didn't say that. You gave me free rein to say whatever I wanted, and I didn't say the thing I should have said. It's set in 1973. So for some of the older people like us, there's a little nostalgia there. Different times where you actually, you didn't carry around in your pocket a way to talk to anybody you wanted to anywhere in the world, anytime you chose.
True. Mike Florio, that was great, man. Congratulations on your success.
Thanks, pal. Good talking to you.
Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, NBC Sports, NFL insider. I think the guy works 22 hours a day. He joined us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Thanks for listening to the show. It's driven by your next Nissan Pathfinder or Nissan Rogue at Cannon Nissan in Jackson. And that Nissan Rogue, unbelievable gas mileage. Nissan Pathfinder, brand new body style, all powered and driven by Cannon Nissan in Jackson. If you missed anything, hit Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Search Out of Bounds with Bo Bounds.